Alright, so today we're going to talk a little bit about general energy systems for cycling and how it relates to nutrition, especially for endurance-based cycling events. We're not going to get into all of the technical details around energy systems and things. We're going to keep it really simple, alright? So there's three general energy systems that are available to a cyclist for riding. One of them we won't touch on, and that's generally for sprinting, and it lasts around about 20 seconds. So not very relevant for recreational events, all right? So the other two energy systems, we're going to talk them the fat and the carbohydrate energy systems, okay? So, and how this burn rate works is that as we're burning percentages, if we draw a little graph, and that's coming up on our screen, okay, all right? And we go intensity down here, all right, and we go energy systems, or the amount of energy systems that we're burning. For a fat, the curve looks a little bit like this, all right? Now don't get too caught up in this because it's not exactly like that, but that's it. So that's fat. So what happens here that as you increase your intensity, you're burning a higher amount of fat at lower intensities, and as you increase the intensity, you burn less and less amounts of fat. Now, the thing is that at the same time, you're also burning a carbohydrate blend as well. Okay, so it's a blend of the two. So this is carbohydrate here. And as we increase the intensity, we burn more and more carbohydrate, all right? So at lower intensities, we're burning a higher percentage of fat to carbohydrate. And at lower intensities, and at higher intensities, we're burning a high amount of carbohydrate to fat. All right, so obviously for a recreational event, you know, generally you'll be riding not a super high intensity. So these sort of intensities up here, you know, sort of intensities that you could maintain for an hour. Now for the three peaks, average time for the three peaks ride is around about 11.5 hours. There's going to be some of you that are going to be taking longer than that, and some of you that are going to be doing it a lot faster than that. So, but generally your burn rate for a three peaks ride, you know, would be more down into this sort of area here rather than this area here. So in this sort of zone, we're obviously burning a reasonable amount of fat to carbohydrate. And look, there's general figures around the burn rate, and you may see figures quoted around carbohydrate burn. We generally recommend that people look at a burn rate of around about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour for the event, okay? So 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Okay, so for the 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate, generally if you're a bigger sort of person, you'll obviously be leaning towards more of the 60 grams of carbohydrate. And if you're a bit of a lean sort of guy like me, a little bit lighter built, then you'll be leaning more towards the 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And that's just because bigger people just need more energy because there's more of them. That's the only difference. Whereas people that are a smaller build, they've got less mass, and so they need less energy. And also the other thing is that obviously the amount of weight that I have to carry up a mountain with my lean build is obviously going to be a lot less than a person with a bigger build. So the energy requirements and demands are going to be different, and that's the reason why the 60 grams more the bigger build person, whereas 30 grams are more for the lighter build person. All right. Okay, so one of the big issues about these energy systems is that with carbohydrate and with fat, one of the issues around the carbohydrate storage is that if we were to go flat out in these sort of high intensities, you've only got around about an hour's 20 worth of carbohydrate reserves in your system, stored in your liver and in your muscles, okay, about an hour's 20 worth of this. And then for fat, well, you've got an abundance of fat, and that the amount of storage that the average person has in fat, you know, you could ride for several days without having to eat. So one of the big issues is how do we supply that carbohydrate to our system, you know, at these sort of intensities while we're riding big events that obviously are going to last longer than a couple of hours. Okay, so with that hour 20 window in the carbohydrates, it's obviously really important that we do eat carbohydrate during the event, all right, and that's really important. And you know, back in the 80s, the marathon, people that were running marathons, you know, you had this hitting the wall or bonking, okay? And in running, they call it hitting the wall. In cycling, we call it bonking. And all it is that when you deplete your carbohydrate reserves, you then have only got your fat reserves. And remember we talked about the blending. So you're always blending carbohydrate with fat when you're riding. Now, obviously when you've depleted your carbohydrate, you're only riding on fat. And at that point where you run out of the carbohydrate, and we call it glycogen, you find that you can only ride, it affects people differently. Some people, like myself, we end up only able to ride sort of about 7 kilometres an hour, all right? You can still walk and talk and those sort of things. Other people, they go into quite a bad distressed sort of state, and they sort of end up on the side of the road just mentally having issues trying to concentrate and those sort of things. So it does affect people in different sort of ways. And so it's really important that you don't get yourself into that state, because obviously, you know, you're not going to perform well if you're in a glycogen totally depleted mode. So one of the really important things about supplementing food into our riding during the events is that we obviously want to start before we get to that state. All right, so obviously when we're talking about this burn rate around fat and carbohydrate, and the storage, you know, about an hour's 20 worth of carbohydrate. Obviously one of the issues is that when we're riding an event, a recreational event, because we're not burning at high intensities, we can usually get 2 or 3 hours of this carbohydrate available to us without having to substitute it with having to eat anything during the ride. Now that's for a reasonably well-trained athlete. We'll talk a little bit initially about high and low GI. So for those people that aren't versed with high and GI, I'll just dumb it down. Low GI type carbohydrates are things that are quite dense. So they're things that take a little while to digest and burn. Things like muesli bars, oats, wholemeal bread. Those sort of things are great sources of carbohydrate, but they're a low burn sort of carbohydrate. Whereas things that are high GI are things like fruit juice, sports drinks, gels, lollies are all high GIs. Before a big ride like the Three Peaks, you want to have a fantastic breakfast, and you want that breakfast to be a low GI type carbohydrate. So that could be, you know, Wheat Bix, it could be brown bread on toast, you know, toast. It could be muesli, it could be porridge. So those are all sort of low GI type carbohydrates. So what we generally recommend people do is they start off with a low GI carbohydrate meal as they progress initially into the ride, and then towards later on we switch that over to a high GI type carbohydrate. So the idea is as soon as you start riding, you want to start targeting this 30 to 60 grams an hour. So for example, generally most nutritional products usually are around about 22 grams of carbohydrate per product. So a gel's around about 20 grams, a muesli bar, you know, a sports bar is around about 20 grams, and a soft drink, if you get a soft drink, they're around about 40 grams of carbohydrate. So you can just look at the product and look at the back of it, and it'll have on the nutritional information on the back, it'll actually state how much carbohydrate is in that particular product. Okay, so, and it usually is in a gram figure. All right, so, and you can use that figure to start calculating out this burn rate. And one of the really important things is that you want to start working on your nutrition early on. So when you're training for an event like the Three Peaks, it's really important to work on working through that nutritional strategy that you're building up. So when it comes to race day, you're not experimenting. You know exactly how much carbohydrate you need for your particular build and for the intensity that you're riding at. All right. So one of the really important things about high GI carbohydrates is that sometimes they affect people and give them what we call gastric distress. And what happens when that happens? When that happens, the person will get an upset stomach. That's all, really. So some people, when they take high GI type carbohydrates, they'll get upset stomachs and they may get stomach cramps, and that'll obviously affect your performance as well. So it's important when you're out training to experiment with high GI type products like gels and sports drinks, and make sure that you're comfortable with taking on those products before you do the Three Peaks. All right, so that's just sort of the basic sort of general things around nutrition for a 3 Peaks event. All right. So the other thing we'll talk about is hydration, and hydration is an interesting subject in itself because it's relying on, there's a lot of variables around hydration, and a lot of them come down to, obviously, again, just like with energy, the build. So if you're a more bigger built sort of person as opposed to a lighter built person, a bigger built person is going to require more water than a lighter built person, and that's got to do with their respiration, the amount of perspiration that they're going to be putting out, and the environmental factor. So the environment plays an important role in hydration as well. And with that, obviously earlier on in the morning you're going to need less water because you're not perspiring so much because it's cooler. And as you get into the heat of the day, you're obviously going to be using and perspiring more water to keep yourself cool. And so you'll need more water. Okay, so hydration is going to vary through the day. And one of the key fundamentals around hydration is that you can only digest, on average person, some people will be more, some people will be less, around about 1.2 litres an hour. Okay, so during the day you may not be sweating or perspiring more than 1.2 litres earlier on in the ride, but you may be perspiring more than that during the middle of the day. So it's important to understand that your water requirements are going to vary throughout the day depending on the environmental temperature. So if it's a very cool day, you may only find that 250 to 500 millilitres of water will be fine. And you may find that you may need to drink 2 litres of water, if that's per hour. You may find that you need to drink 2 litres of water per hour when it gets really hot. Now, one of the really important things about hydration is that obviously if you're drinking too much water, then you're going to have to want to go to the toilet, and that's going to hinder your ability to be able to do the ride. So it's being able to manage the amount of water that you're taking on, depending on the environmental factors around you. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about the amount of water that you're taking on, depending on the environmental conditions. All right. So one of the big things is, right, well, how do I blend that with my nutrition? Like if I want to use a sports drink as part of my nutritional strategy, if I want to use a sports drink as part of my nutritional strategy, then how do I do that blend? And what we generally recommend is that obviously when you're using less amount of water, then you would up or increase the dilution of sports drink to water. And when you get into the heat of the day, you would dilute your sports drink down so that it's more water to sports drink. And that means that you keep the burn ratio, like the amount of carbohydrates you're taking per hour, about the same, but all you're doing is increasing the volume of water that you're taking on during when it gets hot, and obviously decreasing it when it's getting cooler. All right. So that covers off hydration, and it covers off just the basics of hydration. So the important things that we've covered off in nutrition and hydration, the most important things that we've covered off in nutrition and hydration is to go out there when you're doing your training and work out the strategy and plan that works for you, so that you can work out what your blend of carbohydrates is going to be doing, and also what your amount of fluid that you need to be taking on depending on the environmental conditions. So those are the 2 very important things, and you do them when you're training. All right. If you are interested in finding out anything more about training or coaching services, then certainly jump on our website and visit Cycling Inform. Great information on the website. Have a look around. You can contact us with any questions that you may have about the program, training in general, nutrition, hydration,